The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
On behalf of RBCS and software test professionals, welcome to this webinar on leading a test team. I am Rex Black, president of RBCS, a worldwide testing and quality assurance firm serving clients ranging from small startups to Fortune 20 global enterprises. Since 1994, we've delivered insight and confidence to hundreds of clients around the world. Our team of international consultants deliver customized training, consulting, and outsourcing services for companies that are looking to improve their test and quality assurance practices. I'm the author of 12 books on software testing, including the bestseller Managing the Testing Process, and 4 books on the ISTQB program. RBCS is presenting this webinar in partnership with Software Test Professionals. You can check out their website at softwaretestpro.com. And I will be at STPCon conference next week in San Diego. Looking forward to being there. If any of you are there, please do look me up. Attendance at today's webinar earns PMI PDUs. It does. Unlike the last one, and I know some people had some concerns about that. Some of them do and some of them don't. This one does. Thank you to Rex Price for reviewing the materials for PDU status and making valuable suggestions. Attendees will receive an email telling them how to claim PDUs, including the PDU code. PDUs are available for live webinar attendance only. Before we start the presentation, a couple notes. Feel free to submit questions at any time, but please note that I only answer them at the end. You do not need to ask for presentation copies. The presentation is already posted on the web, rbcs-us.com. Go to the Resources tab in the upper middle, and then from there navigate to the Basic Library. You'll find the slides there. By attending this webinar, you've been registered for the free e-learning drawing. Check your email over the next couple days, watch your spam filter, and you might be the lucky winner. We have one lucky winner every month. Hope you enjoy this free webinar from RBCS. We do these free webinars as a service to the software testing community because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. All right, so today we're going to talk about leading a test team. You don't have to be quite as inspirational as this figure here. This is Churchill. Churchill delivering his famous blood, sweat, toil, and tears speech at the outset of World War II, at least the outset of his prime ministership of leading it. Widely noted as one of the more inspirational speeches of history, and you can listen to it online. If you go just onto YouTube, for example, you can actually hear the speech. It is quite inspiring. So Churchill was a great orator. You don't have to be a great orator like Churchill. And Churchill actually had some kind of quirky behaviors. He could be kind of a micromanager at times, and he had a habit of working late hours and then working out of his bed, literally, until about noon. So he might not be the ideal test director or test manager or test lead. So maybe we can improve on Churchill in terms of leadership, if not oratory. Now, a lot of what we do as test managers and test directors is pretty much like what anybody else does. So, common management best practices apply in leading a test team. There are some aspects that are more specific to managing a test team, so I want to touch on both of those. The basic idea here of leadership is, if you've got the right people with the right skills and the right experience, they are capable of doing the work. But how do you make sure that they do the work? How do you inspire them to do their best work? This is what leadership is about. Certainly, leadership is more than just staying out of the way, though it is that too. But it's also about actually taking an active role in moving your team forward. A sip of water here. So let's look at some things that are important. Making sure people know what's going on. So the kind of the rap on some managers is what's referred to as mushroom management, which is keep them in the dark and feed them crap. And that's a trap you want to avoid falling into. But when you ask that question of like, well, what is proper information sharing and communication, it gets a little more tricky than it might first seem. So, the obvious stuff is, make sure that you have a clearly communicated, clearly defined mission, objectives, and goals. Now, this is easy to say, but actually a lot of organizations don't have this, or they have it, but it's not clearly communicated, or it's not clearly defined. They have some idea of what they're about, but they don't have it written down, or it's not achievable. I saw a mission statement of sorts in a PowerPoint presentation of so one organization, like why we test, why the test organization exists, and it basically came down to saying we do this in order to eliminate risk for our end users. And I said, well, now you're setting yourself up for failure with that, because you can't eliminate risk. You can reduce risk to an acceptable level, but you're not going to be able to eliminate it. So that's an example of screwing this up, is that you state what your mission is, but it's not achievable. So separate conversation about defining missions and selecting strategies is something I believe I've had a webinar on before. If not, I'm sure I'll get around to it. But with that in place, with a properly defined mission, objectives, and goals, and this is sometimes in the form of a test policy in place, then you can make sure that you're communicating that to the testers. This is pretty straightforward stuff. If you can't communicate clearly to your team what success is, that is, what you're trying to achieve, then how do you expect them to achieve it? I mean, they're going to come up with their own definition of what they're doing, possibly by reading books or listening to people on Twitter who make very authoritative statements about testing is this and testing isn't that, and some of those statements are pretty bogus too. You get a team that's all pulling in different directions. So what you want is, we have this commonly agreed upon set of objectives. This is what we're trying to do, and specific goals, right? This is how we're going to measure success. And then you need to break that down further too, and be clear when you give somebody a task to say, this is how this relates to what we're trying to accomplish, if it's not completely obvious, right? People want to do work that matters. If they're doing work and they don't think it matters very much, they're not going to do it very well. So you want to make sure that people see that connection to the objectives, and how what they're doing contributes to the larger team's success. Now also, of course, you need to be clear about, these are the people you need to work with in accomplishing this, just so that internal communication while the task is going on is occurring. So certainly a big part of leadership is making sure that you tell people what they need to know, when they need to know it, and that you're careful to make sure that that information is correct, that you're not giving them bad direction or bad information. So, as I said, this sounds simple, but you can have problems here. You can have a too much information problem as well as a not enough information problem. So you want to be able to distinguish between what's relevant, what people are interested in, what people might be curious about, versus just things that are completely irrelevant or distracting. So I saw this happen with one client where they had a stated policy of over communicating. This came from the CEO. He's like everything needs to be shared with everybody, and people were spending enormous amounts of time plowing through emails and instant messages and so forth. So this this created a lot of inefficiency, as you can imagine. Now, ironically enough, the same company, they had an incident later where where their CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, whose only qualification for the job, from what I could tell, was that the CEO had met her one night at in a dance party / rave in Brussels, and they were both high on ecstasy, and they had a really great night together. And the next thing, everybody knew she was working there as the CFO. True story. She decided that she was going to go on a mergers and acquisitions binge and go off and buy some companies that they felt would be a good fit for their company, and didn't really have a clearly defined budget for this and spent more money than they had. And then this guy, the CEO, in an attempt to try to dial back the damage from that, one of his first moves was to go to all of the directors and managers who were doing reviews, personnel reviews, and basically say, you have to find reasons to downgrade everybody's review for the next few months, because nobody in your team, not more than one person in your team, can actually get a merit raise for the foreseeable future. So you have to pick that one person. And don't tell anybody about this. So of course that he was brilliant enough to go even further, and he put this in an email. So you can imagine that the time between him pressing send on that email and the time where that email leaked out to the entire team was, measurable in milliseconds. And an anonymous Gmail account posted on the company discussion board this email that just said, "Pay freeze equals code freeze." Morale plunged. So, this is another thing too, is that you have to be careful about secrets. I mean, that was a particularly nasty secret, and of course that's an example of a style of leadership never to emulate. That's just, that guy was horrible. But that is an interesting story, not only from the point of view of this guy's perfidy, but also the fact that attempting to keep secrets about things that people will be very interested in probably won't work out well for you. Now, I've certainly seen organizations where the general policy on information sharing was what's referred to as need to know. They don't tell you anything unless you actually need to know it to do your job. Now, there are certain situations where, of course, that would make sense. If you're dealing with classified information, if you're dealing with information that could put someone's lives in danger or something like that, then obviously you want to be very careful about who gets access to that information. And of course, if you're dealing with personal information, you have a obligation to maintain privacy there. But just assuming, we don't tell anybody anything unless they actually need to know it. Sometimes it's hard to know and anticipate who's going to need to know something. And certainly, if you're working in an agile world, this is antithetical to the whole idea of a self-organizing team, because it's not possible to say for sure what information that team will need to self-organize. You've got a balance that you have to strike, and you're probably not going to do this perfectly. There are probably times when you will over-communicate and times where you will under-communicate. I would suggest that you communicate to your team as a manager about how you're making this decision and what your general philosophy is, and which way you're going to lean. You're going to lean one way or the other. You're going to lean towards too much information. You're going to lean towards mushroom management, the need to know. What problems would you rather have, and what's more consistent with the larger ethos and philosophy of your organization's management team? Because if you get too far out of line with that can have its own set of problems. I've seen managers who were very big on information sharing within management cultures that were more need to know, and these people were perceived by other managers as kind of mavericks and troublemakers and so forth. So, that has to enter into your calculation as well. Now, I'll just tell you, this is where I come down on this, and then you're going to need to make your own decision. I tend to want to liberally share information with the people that I'm working with. Now, this is a deliberate decision because I have what I believe was Tom Peters referred to as a bias towards action. I like to try things. I like to take chances on stuff that might or might not work out. Smart chances, not risky, dumb gambles. But I want to try things, and in order to feel comfortable trying things, you have to feel like you have enough information to decide, yeah, that's worth trying or not. And if you restrict people's access to information, then they're going to be like, well, I don't know if that's a good idea, or it might not even occur to them, right? So certainly providing liberal access to information will help encourage a bias towards action in your team. The other thing that's very important is you don't micromanage people if you want them to have a bias towards action. If you micromanage people, then they're going to be used to being told what to do, and if they're not being told to do something specifically, they're going to assume I'm not supposed to do that. Also, don't punish people when they make mistakes, as long as the mistake was clearly well-intentioned and was part of trying something that was worth trying and didn't work out. Now, if it was something where you can see this is why it didn't work out, then you'd want to explain to them, hey, this is what you should have been looking at. This is what you should have been thinking of, because this situation was clearly not going to work based on this information. Now, of course, you have to reflect, too, on the possibility that you didn't share the information that the person needed to make that intelligent gamble or to decide not to make the gamble because it wasn't going to work. So when people make mistakes, you don't want to punish them for those mistakes, because that will lead to a more inert team that will not show initiative. Now, and to the last major bullet here, you want to understand that if you're sharing information with your team, that is going to encourage them to share information with you. There's the I think this was something that was popularized at Hewlett Packard called management by walking around, which is this idea that managers should just walk around and talk to people. And obviously that's sharing of information as well as really active listening. But if you don't do the sharing of information part, attempts to get information out of your team by walking around, by talking to them and so forth, by having an open door policy, that won't work, because they see that you're withholding information. They're probably going to play their cards pretty close to their chest too. And again, something else to think of too is when somebody brings you information, keep in mind that they are going to be watching how you react to that information. I had a manager on one project. I was working as a test manager, and he was a project manager. And this guy, you could not give him a progress report. You couldn't come to him and say, this is what I'm working on right now. This is the problems I'm currently dealing with, and everything is under control, and I'll let you know more information later. Because if you told him that, he would immediately, once you got to the problems that you were encountering, he would immediately react. And it got to the point where he'd ask me how things were going, and unless I actually had something that was fully cooked, just done, I just wouldn't tell him about it. I never told him about things that were going on other at the highest level, and I certainly never told him about any of the problems that we were working our way through unless I was actually deliberately escalating to him to get help, because basically he took any discussion of a problem as an escalation, and he would react and start doing things, and more often than not, those things were counterproductive. So reflect on your own behavior in this regard. If you are one of these kind of people that your team bring you information, and you just immediately react, and that doesn't turn out well, what's message is that sending to your team? That message is, don't tell the boss anything because he'll freak out. It's especially bad if you're like this guy who, once things didn't turn out well after he freaked out, he would then blame me for setting off the chain of events, which is like, taking the effect and making it the cause. Basically, it was a very frustrating situation dealing with this guy, and as I said, I just basically got to the point where I told him as little as possible and interacted with him as little as possible. So in terms of communication, there's various ways of communicating. The informal, walking around that I mentioned is certainly one way to communicate. Now, you have to be careful with the informal stuff, that you're able to do it in a way that sounds that's sincere. There's that TV program, The Office, kind of lampoons the fake, schmarmy manager kind of behavior. If you're walking around patting people on the back with a big fake smile on, and you're not doing it in a sincere fashion, and people are probably not going to want to interact with you. They're probably going to feel uncomfortable and want you to go away as quickly as possible. So if you are someone who's previously had a very sort of formal management style, and you're looking to adopt a more informal style, and get into using informal forms of communication, just keep in mind that you're going to need to change the way that you think about that and the way that you're interacting with people when you do that. Certainly one-on-one meetings are good, especially if you have any sort of correction or negative feedback to give to somebody. There's the old rule about praise publicly and criticize privately, right? So, having one-on-one meetings is the way to do that. Now, of course, you don't want that to be the only kind of one-on-one meeting you have, because then if somebody is asked to come to your office and, people see someone going to your office, they're like, oh boy, so-and-so is about to get his butt kicked. You want to make sure that you're having meetings like, as a manager, would often have regular one-on-one meetings with people. I think this is pretty common. Have like a weekly one-on-one meeting with my staff, and it was like, well, whatever you want to talk about would be part of the agenda. One of our clients had what they would call skip level meetings periodically too, which is where you would meet with your boss's boss, and the policy there was that anything that you said in that meeting was strictly between you and your boss's boss. Your boss couldn't find out about it, so there'd be no way for there to be any reprisals for frank delivery of information to your boss's boss, which I think is a good idea to have those periodically, get that communication going. Weekly status reports, I've used those as well. I think those have probably fallen somewhat into disfavor, but they can be useful, especially if you have a distributed team and it's difficult to have regular interaction with them. Of course, there's the daily stand-up meetings if you're doing some variation of Agile that you can attend and listen. I've seen our clients that have Agile projects that managers will go and often just listen. Sometimes they'll get involved, sometimes not. Now, one of the things that I would encourage you to do here, when in terms of communicating, yes, it's important to keep on top of the project, but there also needs to be a forum for communicating about stuff that's not just the day-to-day tactical, what we need to get done the next day, the next week, in order to keep this project moving forward, the longer-term thing. So make sure that people feel comfortable and that you feel comfortable communicating about, more long-term strategic types of issues. And, of course, the active listening, don't be a blowhard, right? Basically what this comes down to. I had a fellow consultant, tell me about about the way that she ultimately decided to I'm trying to keep the innocent here, the innocent and the guilty anonymous. She ultimately decided to stop talking to one very well-known personage in the testing field, and she said, "I stopped talking to Bob, not his real name, when I finally figured out that Bob never was listening to me when I was talking to him." So that's the same kind of thing. If you just walk around and you're like, "Here I am, the great information radiator, and I'm doing such a great job of leading my team because I tell them everything," ask yourself, well, when was the last time you actually listened to them? Right? Sat down and just looked, "Here, tell me what's going on." So if you're not real good at this is something that it's a learnable skill. One of the things I get to do a lot of is assessments as a consultant, and that involves interviewing people. And so I've had to learn to get good at being an active listener. And they said eye contact, watching people, really listening to the body language as much as anything else, getting a sense of what they want to talk about, what they don't want to talk about. Maybe pulling them into areas where maybe they don't want to talk about it so much, but it's important for us to talk about it, how to make people feel comfortable doing that. So, work on that active listening. So the old corny line about, you have one mouth and two ears for a reason, is a good thing to keep in mind. Also, think about how your test management tools are set up. Are they helping the team communicate with each other and also with you, or are they set up in such a way as they put a burden on that? Now, ultimately, this contributes to and is part of how to have loyalty and trust within your team, both to each other and to you. So one of my colleagues once paid me what I still consider to be the highest compliment I've ever received. And this, people tell me, "Oh, I've read your book and it was so helpful to me," and so forth. And that's great. I love hearing that. But the highest compliment I ever got in my professional career was this fellow's comment about, "This project is badly managed. I can't see how it can succeed, and I really don't want to be here, but that would screw you up." And his line about I'd walk across fire to avoid creating a problem for you. It was like, wow, okay, so I've clearly done something right here in terms of fostering trust and loyalty within this team, where somebody who really doesn't want to be there, really wants to quit, won't quit just because it's going to leave me in a bad spot. So, that's the kind of esprit de corps, I guess I'd say, that you want within your team, both not just towards you, but also you towards them, and them towards each other. Now, how do you get that? A lot of this, I think, is just the, basic stuff. Certainly don't ask people to do something that you're not going to do yourself. Asking someone to work late and then, 5:15 you're leaving and they're there, no, that sends a message of, hard work is for the peons while the upper classes don't do that stuff. I mean, that's, you do not want that message because obviously people will not have any loyalty towards you. You ask people to work on a weekend, be there on the weekend, right? You tell people they have to come in early or do some other thing that's uncomfortable to them, make sure that you share that pain. And not in an ostentatious way, right? Don't just show up and go, here I am, behold, I'm here on the weekend just because I asked you to come in on the weekend. No, you come in and you do something productive or make it look like you're doing something productive and stop by and talk to the people that are there and thank them and so forth. But don't be ostentatious about coming in on the weekends or whatever form of sharing the pain that you're asking people to do. Now, one of the things that can be a real issue from a test management point of view is that testers sometimes get abused, usually not physically, but verbally, and sometimes stuff gets hurled at us because of our role in pointing out problems. So I have this general rule, which I think is probably good for any manager, but it's certainly important for us test managers, is that nobody gets to beat up my team. Nobody gets to beat up anybody on my team. You come and try to beat up somebody on my team, now you're going to have a problem. I had this one guy who, when we would file a bug report, he would immediately pop into the test area like within seconds if that bug report had anything to do with his code, and it was always one of two things. He'd say either, well, you don't understand, it has to work that way, that's the way it's designed to work, it can't work any other way, or that bug isn't in my code, it's in somebody else's code. He always had an excuse for why it either wasn't a bug or it wasn't his bug. And he was a big guy, and he would stand over my testers who'd be sitting at their desk, and he'd be like talking down to them in a very domineering kind of way. So I would always come over and insert myself into the conversation, at least when I was there and saw it happen, and basically politely tell him to go away. And I did that a couple times, and he didn't get the message, and so I decided, all right, it's time for him to go to the woodshed. And so what happened was he came in to the office and to the test lab. He started berating one of my testers. And his complaint this time was, well, you guys don't understand how the code's built, so when you classify bugs in terms of the component that they're in, you don't do it right, and this isn't in my component, and I'm tired of getting these bugs set my way when they're not my bug. And so I looked at him, and I pushed the speakerphone and called his boss, who thankfully was at his desk, and I said, one of your developers, Rob, is up here, and he's been up here a few times with this concern. He says that we don't know enough about how the code is built to properly classify bugs, and if this is inconveniencing you, the manager, or your team, we're happy to just classify all the bugs as software, and that being the most general classification, and then you can go through and triage them and figure out where exactly they are, where they belong. It's kind of the silence, and he said, no, you guys are doing a great job of that. That's very helpful to me. Most of the time you get it right. Saves me a lot of time that you're doing that. Please keep doing that. Rob, please come see me in my office right now. Guy never came into the test lab again. That was it. So, be ready to do that. Do not let people abuse your team. Because if people see you, the popular colloquial term here is throwing someone under the bus, right? Sacrificing somebody to save your own neck, or even if it's not to save your own neck, is just doing anything other than standing in front of a flying bullet shot towards your team. Do anything other than that, and you will corrode the loyalty that you have. But if you steadfastly stand up for your team, even when they've made a mistake, and when somebody's made a mistake, again, you coach them in private, but you don't let people publicly beat up on your team, and you don't let people publicly beat up on each other. A little polite or a friendly joshing and playing around in the team is fine, but when it gets hurtful, man, you get in there and you stop it. So this is just a part of how you show respect to your team. You show them that you appreciate them and that you want to create a safe feeling environment for them where they don't have to be worried about watching their back or what's, politics and that kind of thing. They feel like they're doing important work, as I said. Deming had a great, W.E. Deming, the quality guru, had this great rule of quality. There's a number of them. I forget it was like eight or seven or something. There's some number of this kind of rules of how to create a work environment that promotes quality. And one of the primary rules was drive out fear. He would say that if you have an environment that is full of fear, then you are not going to have quality, and you're certainly not going to have people trusting you or having your back if they're afraid of you, or just afraid in general of the workplace. That's part of what you've got to do to be a leader. And as I said, the internal disputes can be as problematic as disputes with you. Sorry about that, another sip of water there. So, make sure there is, again, that sense of shared mission. Make sure that your expectation is mutually respectful behavior. Don't tolerate less than that. Now, obviously, if there are problems between a couple individuals or a few individuals, first steps are private coaching, explaining that's unacceptable. We don't do that. That's not going to happen in this team, and I'm here to make it not happen. If at worst case you can't get this shut off, then you have to get rid of people if there are going to be a negative influence within your team. You want to protect your team again by excising the cancer. Now, part of what has to happen here, too, is, as I said before, make sure everybody understands who does what. There's a failure to communicate properly about ownership of tasks and such. People can feel threatened if they see someone doing something that they perceive as, quote-unquote, their job. So, be sure that you're clear about that. And as I said earlier, model the behavior that you want to see, right? And that goes to the same kind of, mutually respectful behavior and so forth. You don't necessarily have to be one of the guys. I mean, if you're in an organization that tends to have a hierarchical structure and there's sort of an expectation of that, then, you're not necessarily one of the guys. But, you also, regardless of that hierarchy, there should be this sense of you put your pants on one leg at a time, just like everybody else. And, everybody there is, an equal valued member of the team. Now, what are some things you can do to try to build the team, build that feeling of team loyalty, that esprit de corps? Meals, having group meals, having lunches. One of my clients has a regular weekly what they call lunch and learn, and they get together and have pizza or whatever, and one person will put on a presentation about something that they know or something that they do that's of interest to the other people, and that not only is good as a cross-training kind of thing, and also I think it helps build that sort of esprit de corps, and we're sharing knowledge with each other. Celebrating, having parties to celebrate big events like project conclusions and so forth, that certainly is good. If somebody's getting married or, has a baby or something like that, kind of celebrate that. For larger teams, I've seen them have intranet sites or newsletters that share information about what's going on, and I've seen that work. You can have outside people come in and help with this, and of course there's a whole kind of team building industry. I would say be a little bit careful about this, just in that these things have sort of a reputation of being cheesy. The most amazing one that I heard of recently on some sort of NPR podcast, and there's this group of people down in Mexico. It's kind of a tribe down there. They live in this village that apparently are sort of famous for being very good at sneaking into the United States and working here for a while and then going back and so forth. And this is sort of their claim to fame. And they actually have built in their village now this simulated border crossing experience, which they do as some sort of team building exercise within Mexican corporations. That at least is not cheesy, though the descriptions of the whole experience sounded pretty hair-raising. I couldn't imagine putting my team through that, but, people do these kinds of things, coal walking and rope walking and, it's all sorts of stuff that gets done here. I think there's a lot of cynicism about it, and it's seen as cheesy, so I'd say be careful. Make sure that this is something that's actually going to resonate with your organization, both within your team or within your and within your broader organization. Do make sure that you can include as many people as you can in these things, of course, because if you have a team building exercise where only half of the team is there, I'll let you, draw your own conclusions about how much team building actually happened. I would suggest less than zero. Also, cross-functional events. One of my clients has every spring, right around this time, a big crawfish boil that they do. It's the testers and the developers. It's the entire business unit, and so it's like 100 people. It's big, like picnic kind of thing, yes, it's fun. They have a number of people from Louisiana in their team, even though they're in Texas. They've got a lot of Cajun influence in the team, and so the Cajun posse kind of takes charge of the crawfish boil and organize this thing, and their T-shirts and stuff, and it's fun. People have a good time, and you get a chance to talk to developers, and developers talk to testers and so forth, and it helps. It provides that emotional cushion, buffer. So when you get in a situation where there's some stress and some tension, you're remembering, oh, this is also a person I've had a lot of good times with. Now, one of the concepts that underlies a sort of recent, not so recent now, this 20-year sort of surge in interest in agile methodologies, is something that goes back to, I believe this is probably the 80s, it might even be the 70s, something called the Theory X versus Theory Y management. So Theory X management is supposed to be that people are inherently lazy and will work as little as possible, and it's up to management to try to squeeze work out of them. Whereas Theory Y management says, no, people want to work, they want to accomplish things, they enjoy a challenge, they want to be learning, and what gets in the way of that is usually just bad management. The management is actually impeding their ability to work, and creating unnecessary processes and obstacles and so forth that slow them down. Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister have together and separately written books that I would consider to be just sort of the paragons of Theory Y management, exemplars, if you will, of the philosophy of Theory Y management. So it's good to see that, you know, whatever form that takes, that idea is actually prevailing, you know, in software engineering, because I personally think that is true of most people. And you know, you can, if you're careful, make sure that it's true of everybody that is on your team. If you use proper hiring practices, you can avoid hiring people who would just be a barnacle. Now, one of the other things too to keep in mind is that money is a factor here. That the human resources rule of thumb is that money is not a motivator, but money can be a demotivator. And what they mean by that is if somebody feels that they are adequately paid, offering them significantly more money is probably not going to change the way they feel about their work that much. But if somebody feels that they're inadequately paid, no matter what else you do, that's going to create some problems. So you need to be aware of this. Do a check online of salary surveys in your region and see where you stand. And if you are below your regional average pay, you know, you're going to need to think of some things to do to deal with that. You may not be able to just go, hey, I got to give everybody a raise, but at the very least, you know, be aware of that situation and ready to address it through some other kinds of perks, because that's, you know, that is going to create a challenge for you here. Now, praising publicly and criticizing privately, I mentioned before. When you praise publicly, make sure that it is sincere and specific. Don't, you know, just, like I said, walking around the office, patting people on the back, going, "Hey, attaboy, you're a great guy, you know, and such a wonderful worker." You know, especially if it's got that big cheesy fake car salesman smile on your face, this is not going to work for you. You know, it has to be sincere and specific. Point out some specific thing that you were very happy with someone doing. When you do have to give criticism, as I said, you know, do it privately. Make sure that you say, look, this is what happened, and this is why it's a problem. Present facts. Make sure you listen to their side of the story. I had to deal with somebody once. This wasn't, they weren't my manager per se, but it was part of the volunteer organization I was in, and they were one of the superior officers within this organization. And for political reasons, somebody was basically trying to upset my apple cart on something, and so that person went and told this other person, oh, well, you know, Rex isn't really doing a very good job for us in this capacity. And I get off an airplane, having just flown from China to the United States to attend one of these volunteer meetings, and am confronted by this person, together with two other officers in the organization, who proceeds to recite this you know, backstab that had been done, but would not allow me to address who it was or why they might have done it, so forth. Wouldn't listen to my side of the story, and just, you know, berated me for a good 45 minutes over this thing. To say that I have no respect for that person is not to, because of that incident, is not to put it too strongly. I just lost all respect for her at that moment, and you know, pretty much decided that once her term was up, I would rather eat ground glass than serve under her again. So if she were to be reelected to a leadership position in that organization, I might very well resign. So, you know, this is something to keep in mind, that if you are criticizing somebody and you just rip them up, don't let them give their side of the story, and you're very upset and so forth. They might just decide, you know, I don't need this in my life, and just leave. So be careful with that. Don't let your emotions get you carried away here. Keep your, you know, emotions in check. You want this to be solution oriented, you know. So the session should be solution oriented rather than you know, I want to yell at you. People can get bored, so think about things like job rotations, having people shift off. One client was recently telling me about how they rotate people every 6 months between their development team and their maintenance team for exactly this reason, and it also provides some good cross-training. Keep in mind that training and skills growth is motivational to most people, and certainly it's motivational to anybody you'd actually want to have in your team. Don't hire people that aren't motivated by learning. And measure your turnover. If you have a high rate of turnover relative to the rest of the organization or relative to your region, something's going on, and there's a motivational problem, and you need to address it. Okay, so just to conclude here before we open this up for the Q&A, this is challenging, and for those of us who came up through the technical ranks, you're not born knowing this stuff. This is how I came to be a manager. I was a programmer for a number of years, and I worked in system administration, and I worked as porting in a porting project as a programmer. I kind of did a lot of things before becoming a tester, and then I was doing test automation, and so finally someone said, "Oh, well, you're doing pretty good work. Here, we'll make you a manager." So I was a test manager, and then I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's great." And then what I gradually realized is I don't know anything about this, so you have to learn. If you're one of those people who's been promoted up through the ranks, just accept the fact that there's a lot to learn here. That it's some of this is common sense and relating well to people, but there are parts that are just challenging to learn. Figure out the information sharing, how you're going to do that. Figure out the communicating, the over communicate, under communicate challenge, where to strike that balance. Definitely for me, one of the big ones is trying to foster loyalty, trying to make sure that people feel fiercely loyal to each other and the team, and ideally towards you as well. Though, really, the biggest issue is the team cohesion. The military looks at this a lot. The U.S. military looks at this a lot of unit cohesion and so forth. And you hear these stories of soldiers just doing these incredibly selfless things. Throwing themselves on grenades or running through, withering small arms fire to rescue one of their colleagues who got shot. And it's mind-boggling. Some of the things, the stories that you'll hear about these acts of selfless heroism. And, these people are not doing that because someone told them to. They're not doing it for that. They're doing it because they felt that that need to do it. It's like, he would do it for me, she would do it for me, so I'm going to do it for them, right? And you see this come up over and over again. The people in the Boston Marathon bombing, you get to see the worst of humanity on display there, but at the same time, you got to see the best of it because you see people running towards the explosions to help, right? So now, hopefully nothing quite that dramatic and potentially tragic is happening within your organizations, and you not need that kind of response. But, you want to just appeal to that people do the right thing and they help each other out and they're loyal to each other and work well together because it's the right thing to do and because they really like each other and value each other. So build that, try to motivate that, and try to also just to motivate the team, challenge them, but in a healthy way, to get better every day. And again, remember here, this can't be lip service. This is the old cliche, right? Don't just talk the talk, walk the walk, right? So you have to model these kinds of behaviors if you expect to see them. Okay, so as usual, I'll put up the advertisement here as we go into the Q&A session. Richard says, these webinars make a good lunch and learn for your information. Okay, Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I would hope that they would be, if they're at a convenient time zone, a good way to do a lunch and learn, or an afternoon and learn. And remember too that they are recorded and the recordings are posted. So if you're looking for a lunch and learn kind of session on any particular topic, you can go to the digital library and there's all sorts of stuff there that's recorded and you could put up on a projector and use for that purpose. And again, remember, all that's all free stuff. So don't worry about using it for that purpose. That's perfectly fine. So Enoch asks a very good question here. What do you do when different people on the team have different preferences for information openness? One tester may not care to know everything, while another tester may want to know everything that goes on. Yeah, that is a great question. Well, obviously, in that kind of situation, you want to avoid the sort of information distribution by wide-scale email approach, right? Of just like constantly emailing out to the whole team every bit of information that comes along. You can, one way to do that is to help people self-filter, so maybe send out some kind of weekly summary of things that are happening, and mark it as FYI in the subject line so that people know, hey, if I don't have time to read this or if I don't care to read this, I can skip it. Because otherwise most people will probably feel like, yeah, any email my manager sends out, I better read because, I could be held accountable for that. So if you adopted some way of marking your emails that were informational and optional, then that'd be one way to help people filter. Another is to, if you've got one or two people who are the real kind of information hounds and they really like to know what's going on and so forth, just maybe make a point of stopping by their desks, their cubicle every so often, once or twice a week, and just going, hey, they'll give you a rundown of some of the things that are going on in the project and going on in the team, and just, spend the time having a conversation with them. They might very well reward you for that by sharing with you some information that you don't know, because people who are this kind of information hounds, they're probably not just curious about your perspective, they're probably curious about other people's perspective. So it could be kind of a good two-way street. But come up with ways of feeding people the information that they need, that they feel is relevant, and definitely avoid a one-size-fits-all approach if one size doesn't fit all. Also, one of the things that I would mention here too is I personally have become really averse to long email threads. I actually had a rule we put in place here not too long ago, but actually a couple of years ago, which was no third reply, which basically says within RVCS, if you are about to reply to an email and you notice that there have been 2 replies already, don't reply. Pick up the phone, call the person. If there's multiple people involved, get a group call going, get a face-to-face meeting going. Just, the email is a perfectly good way of doing a one-way transmission of information, and having a couple clarifying emails is okay, but email going back and forth, this email ping-pong thing, I think is not very effective, and it's frustrating because, the whole email thing is, it's like a hamster wheel. The faster you run, the faster the wheel spins. So that's something I would think about too, is, are you sending out too much email? Are there better ways of communicating? John says, here in the Mountain Time Zone, I also use your seminars for lunch and learns. Thanks. Oh, cool. Thanks, John. Thanks. Good feedback there. Yeah, it would be perfect if you start right at noon, and if you need to knock off at 1 your time, the presentation's generally done by 1, and the Q&A can run a little longer. So Fatima asks, hi, how do I handle a situation where I have 2 employees? One is very competent and the other not so much, and the competent person tries to put down the not very competent one in private. So I assume that what you're describing here is sort of a whisper campaign where the competent person makes snarky, disrespectful comments about the less competent person to other people on the team, basically badmouths them behind their back. So, yeah, I mean, that's clearly going to be corrosive of team cohesion. But it's also true that if there's a perception amongst people on the team that you as a manager are coddling an incompetent person, that can also be problematic too. So the issue of competence is, is this a solvable problem? Are we talking about junior versus senior? If that's the case, if it's somebody who's basically, beating up the puppy, I would come down pretty hard on that myself. Pull the person into the backstabbing person into my office and say, listen, you were once that guy too. You were once a junior person too, and you made mistakes and you didn't know as much as you did. And if somebody was snarky and disrespectful to you when you were that person, then shame on them, but don't you become that person. Because that kind of backstabbing stuff, I mean, it's just really, it's bad. Like I said, it's bad for team cohesion, right? It's just kind of Lord of the Flies stuff. Now, of course, at the same time, if the person is competent, you want to address this as a problem that you're going to work with them to solve. Appeal to this person's better nature, obviously, is the place to start, and then if there is this perception that you are coddling an incompetent person, then, you needed to address this issue of, is this incompetence something that can be solved, or is this person just in a job that's not a good fit for them? If somebody's in a job that's not a good fit for them and it's never going to be a good fit for them, you're probably not doing them a lot of favors by keeping them around, because they're in this place where they're not succeeding. And of course, the person might be criticizing them in private, but you can bet it's getting back to this person and getting back to the less competent individual, and that's got to be a hurtful situation. All right, Jane says, thank you for this topic. Hoping to hear more like this. I agree in every detail that was discussed. As a team leader, I've experienced many of the examples that you mentioned. I wish I could do something, especially on the money aspect. I know my team deserves to receive more than they are currently receiving, but I have very limited say over that. I can feel at times that they are demotivated. Sad face. Yeah. This is a long-standing problem in testing. The first explicit mention of it that I'm aware of was in Boris Beiser's book. I think this was in Software System Testing and Quality Assurance. It might have been in Software Test Techniques, where he talks about people kind of being, thrown into testing as sort of the cast-offs of the organization and being undervalued and underpaid, it's a real challenge. So, first off, you do need to be aware of it. Pretending the problem doesn't exist isn't going to help you. Now, it probably doesn't make sense for you to trumpet to your entire team, hey, I know we're underpaid. Everybody knows we're underpaid. Discussing money out in the open. I don't think that's a good idea. I know there's that sort of recent movement about get everybody to talk about their salaries. I just think that's just gauche, not cool. Maybe this is just my WASP upbringing kind of coming out, but that's just I was always raised to say that it is not cool to have discussions about how much money you make. At the same time, that's part of the puzzle here. So you need to be aware of it if it is a problem, and then one-on-one when you're talking to your employees, you can sound them out on how big of an issue that's creating for them, and is what beyond money, what can I do to try to help? But yeah, it really does put us in a bind as managers. Erica says, being a test manager for 13 plus years, I sympathize with your various examples of how a test team can be bullied by project management, development team, etc. Having independent test teams is one of the most important achievements. However, it can set the test team even further apart from the project team, reinforcing the idea that testers lack the necessary knowledge on the solution to perform the work successfully. I'd like to hear more about how to take a proactive approach to influence your team as well as the overall organization to further integrate the testers and be perceived as part of the overall team. Cool. So one thing that I'd mention here, this is true in a lot of organizations, and I think it's especially true in organizations that are following agile life cycles, is that there tends to be a real meritocracy that exists in parallel to the actual organizational, org chart hierarchy, the official hierarchy, right? There's the official hierarchy, and then there's this meritocracy that exists of, respect that's given by people towards their peers and leads and managers and so forth based on the knowledge and accomplishments that those individuals have made. So if you are working in a meritocracy, then you have to earn your spurs, right? And the way you're going to do that is through that knowledge and accomplishments, right? So, for example, if the dig on testers is they don't understand the solution, they don't understand the software, well, okay, so then make them more technical. Invest in increasing their technical abilities. Invest in exploring intelligent avenues for automation and so forth. And not only will you make your team more effective and efficient, but you also win the respect of the developers who say, "Oh, wow, those testers, they really come a long way, and they know a lot." Cross-functional lunch and learn type of events. You see if you can organize something like that with the developers. Hey, we'd like to learn more about some API or some element of the system. Can you organize a lunch and learn for us? That sends the message. Hey, people they're interested. So yeah, definitely look for ways of integrating them. At all costs, you want to avoid being perceived as this silo that has this badge pinned on it that says quality cop or process cop, and that you're over there, in an adversarial relationship with other people. I mean, that's just going to be, toxic. Every time I've seen that happen, it's been a harbinger of bad things coming soon. Alicia says, what can you do if your skip-level leader has a negative leadership style? In this situation, every interaction with that person leaves you with bad stress and is disheartening. Yeah. Going back to that theory X, theory Y thing, right? I mean, the reason that you have books about that, and that Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister their books are not only good but necessary, is that there are people like that out there in management positions. Again, people get promoted into management positions for various reasons, and sometimes people are really good at the politics. There's the old line about the climbing up the greasy pole. Some people are real good at the politics of that. They're good at climbing up the greasy pole. They're real smart about never having their fingerprints on failures. They're real good at manipulating situations so that they come out smelling like a rose. But ultimately, when you encounter those people, a lot of times you're like, oh God, how did this person get to this position? I remember my favorite comment on that was I was with a client. We were having a meeting with an executive of a company that they work with, they used as a vendor, and the CEO of the company came in, and he's one of those kind of guys, and like you're describing. And when I went out of the room, my client contact turned to me. He's like, God, every time I'm in the room with that guy, I feel like I need to take a shower afterwards. Yeah, that's not a lot of fun. And of course, you can get people who are, abusive, irritating to deal with. Like, I mentioned that project manager who would just overreact anytime you told him anything, and he'd scream and yell at you. It was your fault that he overreacted. Yeah. You're going to deal with people like this, I guess, is all you can do is just come to the conclusion that every now and then you're going to be in a situation where your manager's manager or even your manager is a turd, honestly, is someone you don't want to have a lot to do with. You can try to get yourself transferred into another group, but if you really love your job and what you're doing, and, you just have to figure out a way of dealing with the situation. I can't remember who said this. It's something I read where somebody was saying, I think this was that general, the general in the first Iraq War. His name escapes me at this point. He wrote a book, and in the book he was talking about in the military, you do move around a lot, so you have. You're serving under a lot of different officers as you're progressing up the officer ranks. And he said basically that one of the things that he learned early on was you have to learn how to adapt to your manager's management style. It's not up to them to learn how to adapt to you, and I think that's probably a good thing to keep in mind. Right. Norman Schwarzkopf, that's the guy. Yep, Norman Schwarzkopf. Yes, Stefan mentioned that. Thanks, Stefan. It occurred to me just at the moment that you mentioned it. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a good book. And if you're a manager, I'd encourage you to read it. Awesome webinar, Rex. Insightful as usual, says Levi. I don't know about walking across fire, but I always enjoy your lessons. Thanks. You're welcome. Yeah. I don't expect most people to want to walk across fire for me or for anyone else, but certainly, yeah, fostering team loyalty, I think, is really important. Lalia says, any advice for an offshore team? What's the best way to manage them since they are so far away? Communication is going to be a real challenge here, especially if there are time zone issues. You just have to figure out how to try to make them feel like part of the team. I've always said that successful distributed teams involve a lot of jet fuel, by which I mean that managers have to travel to be in these different locations. But of course, that tends to run smack into the main reason why people are doing this distribution of work, because they're trying to save money. So, face-to-face kind of stuff via webcams, telepresence if you can afford it. Just look for ways of trying to break down those communication barriers as much as possible. But it's going to be exceptionally difficult to build personal relationships with people unless you're actually physically there. Let's see. Fatima and Erica both said thanks for your answer. Joe has a question here. How do you handle the senior employee with a negative attitude and who complains about everything? It could cause a negative influence on others in the team. God, don't you know it? Yeah, I've worked with that guy. I've worked with that guy a few times. They know a lot. They've got a lot of experience, but they're bitter, and they just love spewing out their unhappy feelings on all and sundry. That is a very difficult thing to change, because ultimately you're talking about a personality trait that's been arrived at through a lifetime, right? I mean, people are not born bitter. This is something that's come up over time. And, you have to kind of ask yourself with these kind of guys, and it's like, okay, this person's a real negative influence on team cohesion and morale. How does that weigh in the balance against their abilities? Now, of course, the standard HR thing to do here is that you start working them through a PIP, right? A personnel improvement process. Whatever your organization does, you're going to, okay, talk about this and, documenting incidents and so forth. But sometimes people just feel entitled. This just happened, right? With the BBC, they had to fire that guy who runs that car show that they have, which is like apparently one of their most successful things. Some guy, I can't again, but I just heard his name, but it's still slipping my mind. But anyway, this guy is like one thing after another. He made comments that were alleged to be racist, and then comments that were alleged to be homophobic, and the last hurrah was apparently he got into a verbal altercation with the producer on the show, which actually escalated to the point of him hitting the guy because there wasn't a hot meal at the end of the day. He's too good to eat a sandwich or something like that, right? So this is going to be an issue, right? It could be that this guy might not realize how disruptive he's being. And he walks around being an Eeyore without realizing what a downer that is. And, that kind of person, you could go through a process with them to kind of work through that and maybe get them to stop doing it. Perhaps you don't change their personality, but at the very least you make it clear that if they can't have that element of their personality on active verbal display when they're at work. If they want to grouse at a local bar or something, then they can do that. And if the person does not have that feeling of entitlement, then maybe that will work with them. But unfortunately, if you're dealing with somebody who feels entitled to that kind of behavior, then that's going to be really hard to deal with. I've been in job interviews, interviewing people for jobs, where all they wanted to do was vent about how stupid their manager was who fired them. And I couldn't get them off of that topic. It's like, whoa, how self-destructive can you possibly be? You're totally sabotaging yourself in the interview. But the guy persisted on it, on multiple occasions. I've seen this happen, So, if you've got somebody who's exhibiting that kind of really disruptive behavior, it'll be very difficult to do anything productive about it. Ultimately, I think they're going to have to go unless you can convince them to just stop doing that. Lena says, we are starting a lunch and learn to get our CTFL using your book to help the team and team leadership. Oh, good. Good luck with that. Lila says, thank you so much for your answer. You're quite welcome. And Stefan is my memory again here. Jeremy Clarkson is the guy's name, the guy, the BBC personality who just got fired for basically just being an entitled ass. Very, very talented, but not someone you want to have around. Larry Summers managed to, through years of that kind of boorish behavior, effectively talk himself out of the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank job. That's why Janet Yellen is in that position now, and people wanted Larry Summers to be put in there, but Larry Summers just had this track record of saying things that were just completely obnoxious and feeling very entitled to do it. He's one of these guys like, I've got this huge IQ, and therefore that gives me a right to behave like an ass. Well, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't. And he didn't get a job he very much wanted because of that, right? So that's a lesson to remember. That's you can sabotage yourself very easily with that kind of entitled behavior. And I always say, things come up about people being dumb or people being smart, and it's like, stupid is as stupid does, as the line from that movie goes. I've seen some really smart people do some really dumb things, sabotage themselves seriously. So don't be that guy, as the cliche goes. All right. Well, thank you everybody for a fascinating post-webinar Q&A session discussion. As very, very good points. Yep, Forrest Gump, right? Yep. Thanks, Stefan. You did it again. I did remember it just after I said it, but yes, it's Forrest Gump, a movie full of great little pearls of wisdom, for sure. So to close the session, a little bit more about the resources available. As you know, we do these free webinars once a month. You can sign up at rbcs-us.com. If you want a special presentation of this webinar or any other webinar, send a email to info@rbcs-us.com. You can also sign up for our regular free newsletter there. Newsletter comes out every other month, but we also will send out discount coupons pretty regularly via that. I'm on Twitter at RBCS. We're also on Facebook, RBCS-INC. Do remember to check your email, because you might be the lucky winner of the random e-learning. And if you think this webinar was good, Donna just said, wonderful webinars. Thank you. Thank you for that kind comment. If you think these webinars are good and helpful, send a pointer to other people, the link to our digital library, which is, again, under the Resources tab, right next to the basic library. And you can see the recorded webinars there. This one will be up in about a week. We also post them as podcasts, so you can subscribe to the podcast and get them that way. And they're also posted on YouTube, by the way, so you can subscribe to our RBCS channel on YouTube to see them. We offer these free resources as a service to the software testing community, because at RBCS we are a not-just-for-profit company. This concludes the webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining us today.